All right, I would say we can get started. And if folks are trickling in here and there, that's all good. All right, so welcome everyone to the second installment of this semester's Envirolums Careers in the Environment series. Today we're focusing on landscape architecture and ecological restoration with our guests and alum, Sarah Bray and Mike Tramutola, who are both Oberlin College alum from class of 99, if I'm correct. Thank you all for being here tonight via Zoom. Yeah, we would love to see your faces if possible, but just remember that we are recording, so keep that in mind throughout the event. My name is Phoebe. I use she, her pronouns. I will be facilitating today's event, and I'll open it up to Sarah and Mike to introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah. I think we can just jump in, Mike, or do we want to do like a little brief intro? My intro is my presentation. So
Sure. Yeah, but Sarah and I are both as Phoebe said, class of 99. And we didn't know each other, but we've gotten to know each other a little bit in the last couple of weeks. It's been really nice to kind of reconnect. And yeah, I'm out in LA, and I'm a landscape architect. And yeah.
Yeah, so I'm in New York City. I'm actually in Brooklyn, and I work for the city of New York as a landscape designer and ecologist. And so that's where I'm at right now. So yeah, this has been great. I have to say thank you, Mike, for saying that, because it has been fun to connect with you too. So this is a good opportunity. So I'm just going to jump in and share my screen and start going through some stuff. Let's do this. Share my screen. So I put together a little presentation, but before I get into that, I wanted to give you guys some more background, and I'm going to run through this really fast. This is my resume. So I just wanted to I think maybe what I'll use annotation here. I just want to highlight a couple of things. When I left Oberlin, I went to Seattle, Washington, and I did not work. I was an environmental studies major with a minor in Spanish and studio art. Was my double minor. And when I got out, I leaned on my studio art and took a job for the next 7 years. Ended up working in custom picture framing, and then decided I wanted to get back into the environment. When I first moved out to Seattle, making money was more important at that time than finding a job in the environment, which I attempted to do and struggled with a little bit, but that's sort of what happened. Oh, you can't scroll when this is annotated. So I ended up, so what I ended up doing was I went to the University of Washington and got my master's in wetland science and management, which I over here. And then actually that was my launching point, and I left Seattle and went to Minnesota and worked for a company called Prairie Restorations. And I'll show you all these things. So in my presentation, I'm just whipping through it right now, and then I'll touch on more detail for each one of these things. It's just background. Then that was for about a year, and then I went and worked for a natural history museum, which was a pretty cool experience. And then went to Western Mass and got my master's in sustainable landscape design. And from a school called the Conway School. It's a small
Hey, Sarah.
Yeah.
Is there any way that you could expand the, like make it like a little
Yeah.
bit bigger so we can read it?
Oh,
Thank you so much.
that's too big. Yes, good point. I'm so sorry. Yeah. Yeah, right. Okay. And maybe I don't even need that side part. Yeah. Thank you for asking. There's like the perfect, there we go. So yeah, so then once I graduated from the Conway School of Landscape Design, then I moved to New York City and found a job. It was called the New York Restoration Project, but it actually was not doing restoration work. It was being part of the Million Trees Initiative and just finding trees locations. And I'm not gonna, I have this company with a landscape designer as a background that I opened simultaneously, but I haven't delved too much into that. So I'm not gonna touch on that. And then I jumped around to work for a couple of environmental consulting companies, one in New Jersey, another in north of New York City, and then finally to where I am right now, working for New York City Department of Environmental Protection. As I started in their ecological services department, and then I jumped into the green infrastructure unit. So okay, so that's the background. So let me jump into this part. And also, just as a side note, I had some technical difficulties because I ran out of file space and couldn't fix this presentation. So it is what it is. All right, so that's a picture of me. This is actually when I did wetland science and management. This is me, and this is me digging holes in the ground to figure out where the edge of a wetland was, which is just the logistics of it. I wanted to give you guys an idea of what all these things look like. I was doing controlled burns when I was in Minnesota, and also the other part of it, I'm sorry, I can't move these pictures because it won't let me edit anything. Also, I was spraying chemical to control invasive species, and I almost didn't take this job because I didn't want to be spraying chemical because I felt very conflicted about that. And it actually was the reason why I waited so long when I was when I was doing wetland science and management, University of Washington, it took me a couple of years to actually go into environmental consulting and restoration work because there's a lot of pieces to it that you have to weigh out. So for me, there was spraying chemical. Also, when you're doing wetland delineations, you are doing it for a regulatory purpose, which means that someone has hired you to tell them where the wetland line is, and they may be filling the wetland. So they're trying to figure out where that line is. There's a lot of, in the end, I decided that it was worth it because I care so much about what the work that I do that I knew someone's going to do that job. And if I do that job, I'm probably going to do a better job than someone who doesn't care. Actually, I didn't end up doing wetland delineations until I moved to New York City. So there was a long hiatus in the middle of there because I got my certificate of wetland science and management after Oberlin. That was probably 2002, and I didn't end up working in environmental consulting until like 2010. So it was like 8 years later. But in the meantime, I wasn't lighting fires, but I was helping to put them out. This is one, they're doing controlled burns. So what I was doing in the Midwest. Man, I can't see my time when I do this. Hey, Phoebe, will you just tell me when I have 5 minutes left?
Sure thing.
Okay, thanks. So ecological restoration, quickly, this is what it looks like. This is restoring a wetland. I wanted to include the detailed specification. I know you can't see what that is, but I wanted to put that document on the side because it's important to know that for every job that you have in ecology or landscape architecture, you're often operating off of something called the specification, which is a book that could be, 100 to 300 pages long for any given job. So it can get pretty complicated, and it's usually written from a base. It all has to do with construction. So a lot of what I was doing was also construction oversight. Mike will tell you about that too, because I know he's done a bunch of that. So this is in New York City. And the picture on the right, this is some fill. They created this little shoal in a really hardened shoreline in a pretty historically contaminated area, which is why these guys are wearing hazmat. They're called bunny. They call them bunny suits. Not very cute, but anyway, this is another. This is a landfill, and this is in Staten Island. And I'm going to jump forward because I want to show you. I'll jump back and forward. This, obviously, that picture on the. Can you guys see your own pictures, or does that go away? Let me put it at the bottom. I don't want to distract. So when I was on this site, I was the restoration specialist that was working for an environmental consulting firm, and I was the only female on site. And it's a 300-acre site, and there was 300 men who were operating on this site. There was one other woman who was the admin, actually 2 other women who were admins who were in the trailer, which is, you can see over here. I don't know if you guys can see my pointer, but those are the trailers that I spent 5 years on this project and saw it from, digging trash. And a lot of this was, they capped it with a liner. So when I show you this is actually up to 2 feet of soil. And then they seeded it, and this is erosion control blanket they put down to prevent erosion. And there was some wetlands that were surrounding too. Historically, Staten Island is like 1/3 wetlands, but it got so filled. I'm sure you guys have heard of Fresh Kills landfill. This one is near Fresh Kills, but this one's actually a Superfund site. There was a lot of illegal dumping that happened with this. Again, there's always conflict when you choose, this type of job in the environment, because you're around questionable material. I had to have training on hazardous materials. I'm certified as a hazmat. I've taken my hazardous waste and operational training. Anyway, so this guy's digging out what will be a wetland. The picture on the left is actually the wetland that was planted. These lines on here are to keep geese out, which are always a problem. And if you make friends with the operators, they'll even take a tree and drop it in the wetland for wetland habitat creation. Okay, so now we're going to jump to New York City. So remember, so now I got my master's in landscape design, and I moved to New York City. I'm skipping over the Million Trees Initiative because I was just planting trees in the city. It had its own complexity. That was when I was working for a nonprofit, actually, and found working in a nonprofit in New York City can be incredibly stressful. But anyway, switched. When I first moved to New York City, actually, that was before I did this project. So now I'm working on the green infrastructure unit. And so my primary focus is planting planting rain gardens, overseeing the planting of rain gardens, I should say. And I want to show you the components of that. So remember, I showed you that page back here. That's called the detailed specifications. This is the contract. This is what the contractor will bid on, and it's like a 300-page book. By the way, most of these jobs, this job itself was $375 million to do this landfill closure. And some of that had federal money tied to it because it was a Superfund site. These rain gardens, so they require a contract just like anything else that a contractor will bid on in different areas, and then they will also receive different plans. These are planting standards. These are ones that I updated myself for for the rain gardens. And it's a constant evolution because it's trial and error. One of the things that's really, really challenging is working with engineers who don't understand that plants are living things, and it's a moving target in terms of success and failure. It's not like when you look at a rock, you know it's a 5-inch rock. And that is something that's specified as 5-inch stone. And actually, this is your 5-inch stone. This is what the engineers are looking at. And actually, I've done some oversight of this also, so I get to play engineer occasionally because I know the specifications for all of this stuff. So this is what's underneath the rain gardens. It's for infiltration. It's for stormwater collection, like any rain garden. And they fill it with stone. Actually, before they do that, they do geotechnical borings and make sure that it actually drains. Otherwise, they abandon the site. And then they fill it with stone. Actually, they excavate it. Here's our operator. So obviously, I'm around a lot of construction here. Here's they backfilled with stone, and then the end is the plants and the soil. And this actually has erosion control fabric as well. Phoebe, how am I on?
Oh, we had the same thought. About, I'd say, a minute or two.
Okay, good. So I'm pretty close to the end here. So one of the things, I've sort of been trying to mention challenges that happen along the way that arise. Maintenance can be one challenge. Here's an example of a rain garden that we planted, and then the pandemic hit and they didn't have the maintenance crew available. And this whole thing is just all weeds, which is such a disappointment. But then also this happens, you have construction nearby, so the work that you do gets destroyed. So everything that you do as a landscape architect or a ecologist, or you always need to think 5 and 10 and 20 years into the future. That's the responsibility of you. I just wanted to remind everybody why we're all in this. This is a spring peeper. I found this in an ecological survey when I was working for the environmental consultants. It was actually a biological survey I was supposed to do, looking for amphibians. And these, it's a monarch caterpillar and the chrysalis, which were in New York City rain gardens, which are exciting. And then I just wanted to also give you a broader view. And I know Mike will give a really good idea of a totally different take on landscape architecture, but I wanted to show you, I'm sort of, because I'm so steeply based in ecology, there's sort of like a messiness to it. And even these are also public parks. This is just recently, the two pictures on the right are a place called City Island that was just built. This is the extreme collaboration between multiple agencies and landscape architects and architects to create this incredibly, it's like a botanical garden that they imported here. We'll see what the maintenance ends up being for this. But just wanted to give you an idea of where landscape architecture is and how it can be used. Here's another big public park. This is on Governor's Island. So that's my bit. So I'll stop my share and open it for maybe a couple questions, and otherwise we'll move to Mike.
I had a question. So you had said like one of the first projects you mentioned that you worked on it for like 5 years, and like working on just like one project for like a long period of time, it can get like frustrating. Like, do you find it rewarding at the end, and like what parts make you like feel the most rewarding?
It's interesting because that's a really good question, because luckily when you have a job in landscape architecture or I mean anything in the environment, you often will have multiple projects going at the same time. So I did have the luxury of getting off the landfill occasionally and doing wetland delineations, which was really good, or ecological surveys, which was amazing opportunity to learn how to do those things. But that 5-year project for me was a really tough relationship. And I call it a relationship because it really was. there's so many things that I went through. I grew a lot in that project. You know, when I first took it on, I didn't know much about landfills at all, and I didn't know anything about composing myself around that many contractors at one time. I was really lucky because the foreman on site I think he started to worry about me, and he actually told the contractor that they needed to listen to me, and things really changed after that time. And he really propped me up to give me the authority. So having an advocate on a site like that was really important. I haven't actually been back in a few years, but I didn't have a picture of what it looks like right now. Those mounds are now grasslands that were planted with trees, and it's a park. So I have pride in it. I think for all of the projects you have, there is pride in how you compose yourself with certain things, and frustration. It's everything's learning. And actually, Mike will talk about this too. You know, he and I think that everything we do, we learn. You know, every new project that you have, you learn something new. And I think that we are life learners. You know, I've gone back to school, but even on the job, I've learned so many things. And I think having that kind of attitude has helped me survive some of the more challenging relationships that I've had. So yeah, so thanks for that question.
I think in the interest of time, can we save the rest of the questions for Sarah's presentation until after Mike has given his? Thank you.
Go for it, Mike.
Cool. Great. So I'm gonna share my screen here. Can you guys see? Should be blue. Cool. So I'm going to talk a little bit about like what landscape architecture is, and then kind of my pathway into it. And then I'm going to talk about one or two, time permitting, we'll see how long I run my mouth, projects, so you can kind of get a little bit of a taste of what it's like to kind of be in the weeds. And so landscape architecture is a really broad field, which is great because there's a lot of room for you to find your place within it. The landscape architecture, the term was actually first coined through the design of Central Park. So Central Park was a design competition, and it was Olmsted and Vaux who came together and made a team and basically coined the term landscape architecture to describe what they were doing. It was more than just garden design. It was more than kind of placemaking. They were creating a new part of the city. But landscape architecture goes way back. People have been designing landscapes kind of from the beginning of time. And we now understand the kind of the process of kind of landscape as basically part of city making, and part of kind of understanding spaces for people, whether they're agricultural or ceremonial, or to show power, to show prestige, showing the kind of manipulation of nature. And then increasingly through the 20th century, there's been a lot of kind of amazing work about kind of bringing the principles of design to kind of everyone. And so that basically is kind of within cities and parks, creating, fountains and so they're not just kind of gardens for the privileged few. One of the most kind of the best pieces of landscape architecture of the 20th century was done by Maya Lin, which is the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. It's a piece of kind of amazing sculpture and occupiable landscape if any of you have not seen it, it is a kind of 1A thing to do in DC. So I, at Oberlin, was an environmental studies major also. I did my entire third year abroad. So I came back and was just trying to like finish up my credits and everything like that. So I had enough credits for a studio art minor, but just never did my paperwork. But I did a lot of installation work, site-specific kind of art. I was very interested in kind of these type of things. But after Oberlin, and until now, I've actually gone to 4 different schools and did different trainings at different programs. It was really kind of great to, I took an art class at UAB. I did a woodworking in carpentry at Laney College in Oakland. I studied kind of principles of landscape architecture at the UC Berkeley Extension, and then got my master's in landscape architecture from the University of Virginia. So it was really interesting I could talk for a while about that, but I'll skip through. And I'm just going to jump to a project. So this is a before, so don't worry, it doesn't look great, but this is a Domenici Federal Courthouse in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And this is the courthouse here. And here's the kind of the rear part, which is largely a parking lot, and this kind of front entry landscape. So my project was to kind of reimagine the project. And so me and the people that I was working with looked at the history of the site. And we found that originally there was an acequia which ran, so the Rio Grande so Albuquerque and Santa Fe are in the Rio Grande kind of floodplain. So the Rio Grande is about a mile away, but so this acequia was a kind of a traditional drainage canal, which was parallel and brought kind of floodwaters from the Rio Grande to farms that are within what is now Albuquerque. And so an acequia kind of went diagonally through the site, and you can kind of see the old small plots before kind of urbanization that were kind of private and shared family plots along the property. The existing site had this kind of just an enormous expanse of paving, which was really imposing. There's a parking garage below, which you can kind of see accessed from down below. So this is all this kind of below grade parking garage with this fountain, which you can see is turned off because it leaked and flooded into the parking garage. And so we're in the high desert in Albuquerque, and they were using an ungodly amount of water to keep this grass green. And it was really imposing and didn't feel kind of welcoming. Here you can kind of see it from the ground level, really kind of empty space. So what we did is we basically said, let's use all this paving. And so we selectively demoed the concrete into these workable blocks. And so here you can see as demoing the concrete, I drew demolition details, which showed, how to create a workable block that could be kind of used. And then, so here are those blocks being stored before they're constructed. And then here is a mock-up of one of those blocks on site. So what do we use those blocks for? So here's one in construction. So we use those blocks to basically create a series of walls to, rather than having the landscape be kind of uniform, we use these walls to create pockets of wet and dry to create more kind of passive storage and detention of site water, to create kind of a more kind of diverse garden landscape. And so here you can see kind of a diagram of some of the things we did on site. So we actually captured roof water and stored it in a subterranean cistern in the sidewalk, and then used all of that recycled concrete to create these series of walls, kind of directing water and kind of detaining it to create those kind of like wet pockets. And this is a diagram that I did the calculations for, but my Nick, who I was working with, who's over the graphics, was put this together. And so this was basically our water inventory pre-project and post-project, where we looked at how much water we were using on the project, how much we were importing, what that water was going to. And most of it was basically irrigating that ungodly amount of lawn. And then our new project, we were basically importing a lot less, getting a lot more water from the rainwater storage, and then really reducing the water use palette. And so this was done early in concept design, and we found that we were pretty close, actually, 2 years later after the project was done, to these numbers. We also did a number of different things. We didn't have enough money to redo the parking lot, so we just installed some trench drains in the parking lot to direct the stormwater that was falling in the parking lot to medians, rain gardens in the medians. You can see it kind of planted a little bit. And so here it was after construction. You can kind of see that those walls kind of creating a little bit of that folding that creates those kind of different gardens. There's the project. How much more time do I have?
Got about 5 more minutes.
Okay, I'll go quickly. I'm gonna do another project. This is a very different project, but I have a few more drawings in it, so I think you can see a little bit more about the practice of landscape architecture. This is a project I did on the Universal campus. This is a courtyard, all above parking as well. So this project was basically generated from looking at it was a courtyard space, and there was an NBC Nightly News and Telemundo on the sister buildings, and each one of them had a different kind of frequency. And we looked at those frequencies and developed a geometry based on those frequencies. You don't have to kind of get it, but that's where this kind of geometry came from. And so here's a look at some of the construction documents that I did for this project, where how to lay out the concrete geometry for a project with kind of complex geometries like this. And so it involves basically going back between plan and section. So basically finding a point, locating it in space, and then basically unfolding this shape and inscribing how that shape kind of moves both in plan and in section. Also describing little kind of like complex little nooks of how things kind of come together. And then it's like, crazy steel and construction process, how these things are laid out, how the formwork goes. As Sarah was mentioning, I think that, we're always looking at, replicating natural processes, right? Naturally, the ground is much more kind of vague, right? It's more well drained, and today we have created it. It's either a wetland or hardscape. Things are much more kind of single use. And so in a project like this, where we're basically synthesizing, we're bringing dirt here, we need to kind of create drainage. And so all these things are very artificial. And so we have to look at like, how are they performing and try to mimic kind of natural processes. So here we are, basically all of this soil is being blown up because this is on a 3rd floor up above a parking garage. And so all of this is basically being pushed in this reverse vacuum, basically to bring all the soil up here. And here's the product right after construction. And this image I like to include because Bernie was interviewed here, and I find that like a lot of the work we do is, we're not like necessarily directing the policies, but we are like providing the spaces that I think are where sometimes those policies are argued about, or sometimes where we can kind of dream about, how things should be. And I think I'm going to cut myself off there and get to some questions. How's that sound? I have more slides, but I think I'm going to stop there.
That sounds great. Thank you, Mike.
Okay. So,
Wait, Mike, can I ask you, since we're on you right now, can I ask you, so this is your own company, right?
This is, so I have my own company currently. Both projects that I've showed were projects that I did while working at Rios Clementi Hale in LA.
Okay. So what made you decide to split off and start your own company?
Good question. I think that
there's a risk. I mean, like, how did you decide at what point the benefit outweighs the risk?
Yeah, I think that, so I was working at a company for a couple of years. I've been practicing for 16 years. I've graduated with my master's in 2004. So I've been at this a while. My wife is an architect. And so I've worked at this firm that I worked at here is a multidisciplinary office. So I know lots of architects. So I have a good kind of community of folks. And I think I just realized that it was an aspiration of mine to have my own company someday. And I realized that my old office where I was at, it was hurting me more than it was helping me. You know what I mean? I was spread so thin. I was like, working on 40 different projects, and each one of those people thought I was only working on theirs. My boss let me handle all the problems and and so I was like, just pulled the cord. So I started my own business in December of last year.
Congratulations on that. It's a
Thanks.
lot of work, I know. Okay, so then also tell me about, or tell everyone about like amassing a portfolio and what that means.
Okay, so I do have lots of thoughts about portfolios and about interviewing in general, not even in design. So I interviewed people and hired them at my old job for 5 years. And so I've seen thousands of portfolios, and I've met with hundreds of people. And I have a couple tips that are both like interviewing anyway, and then design. So I'll give those to you. So one is, when you are interviewing with someone, they're calling you in because they're busy, right? They are busy. And so be mindful of their time. Show that you can respect their time and understand that like time is money. When you sit down, ask them how much time that they have. And that shows that you are kind of respecting their time. And then you can kind of tailor your presentation, your talk to their time. And you say, do you have 15 minutes? Okay, let me give you my 15-minute presentation. And then if you have more than 15 minutes of, let's say you're showing a portfolio, you can skip over slides and say, well, we don't have time to get to this. And you can give them a little taste. So I can kind of I'll share you my screen again. I have other things here, and unfortunately, I don't have time to get to this because I want to get to something else. And so you can give them a little bit of like a little candy, you know what I mean? Without actually having to take time to do that. The other thing is, two more things. One is, when all work in the work environment is group work. So find a way to complement someone that you've done work with, because they will be working with you if you get the job, and they want to hear you compliment them. So like I talked about my friend Nick, who I did that project with, like, it doesn't, when someone asks you, oh, is this a group project? They're not wanting to hear, oh, no, I did everything myself, or, oh, this person I was working with, they didn't do anything and I had to do it all myself. Give someone some props to show that you are a good team member. And so that's something that are really good to do. And then if you're looking, last comment, if you're looking at making a portfolio and you haven't taken any art classes or anything like that, do an infographic. Make something graphic that isn't necessarily a graphic. So I have one in here. Am I still sharing my screen? So this is something that I did that basically is describing my pizza recipe and all of the different people in my family who brought their own ingredients and how this person does it like this. And I gave a whole presentation about it, but basically I made like a graphic about pizza. But so you can do something about, I don't know, Frodo going to, wherever he went, and like doing, you can make an infographic based on something that you're interested in. That could be a way to figure out how to show something graphically. Those are my tips.
Awesome.
So Sarah, when we were chatting, you teased my worst job ever, my worst day ever, and I have to hear that. So do you mind, like?
Okay, so my worst day on the job ever was my first day of working at the Prairie Restorations, and I was in Minnesota. I was about 25. I felt invincible, as you often do when you're in your 20s. I also felt like women can do anything. And so I had like a lot of, let's call it gusto. So anyway, aside from that, I took this job, was not sure I wanted to take it because of the chemical spraying, actually turned the job down and then changed my mind and they accepted me. So that was amazing. Anyway, first day on the job, I got to work. They said, all right, it's burn season. So let's do the paperwork as quickly as possible and let's get out there. So fill out the paperwork, jump in the truck. They're like these, Ford F-350s, big muscly trucks. We run out to the site. It's like burn season, which is in the spring when things are just starting to be green, but not too green. So they said, all right, we're setting some fires. We need you to put them out. So without any instruction, because it was go, 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 they put a water pack on my back and they said, all right, we just laid fire down in this area. We need you to just put it out. So it had like smooth smoldering. So I'm walking on the smoldering embers and what do you know? I catch fire. So my pants caught fire and everybody thought it was hilarious. I ended up having like 3rd-degree burns. So that was not good. But the next thing I did was they're like, okay, you're not any good at that. Let's put you in a truck. We're going to the next site. You just have to drive the truck from one side to the other. And they said, all right, we're setting fires in 2 different locations. So we need you to drive this truck across the site through the prairie. So of course, before I knew much about wetlands, I decided to drive straight as the crow flies, which was through a wetland, kind of, and I got the truck stuck. This is still the same day. So I got the truck stuck and they couldn't get it out. They ripped the bumper off trying to take the truck out. Anyway, that job, I learned a lot.
Ouch.
I learned humility was one of the biggest things that I learned, that I didn't know how to do a lot of things. But yeah, that was my worst first day.
As we're coming up on sort of 10 minutes left, I wanted to open the floor to students to ask some questions to you guys.
Go for it.
I had a question for you, Sarah. How do you think that your work in the Midwest and in the prairies is kind of like informed or translated into you working in a city?
That is a very good question. Luckily, there's a lot of species from plant palettes that cross over, especially with the work and the movement of landscape architecture right now. There's an emphasis on native plant usage and even resiliency. So like, for example, some of the plants that we select for the rain gardens are native wetland species and also upland species that we find in prairies that are able to uptake water. So some of the characteristics of the plants are able to translate pretty easily. Yeah, it's a good question.
Hi. I was wondering if, because I know both of you said that you had some background in studio art or almost major or minored in studio art. I was wondering, like, do you really need like a strong background or in your education or just general experience in order to go into landscape architecture?
I think you'll see, I'm gonna let Mike actually mostly answer this question because you can see his artistic sense has come out much more in the projects that he's taken on. My artistic background is sort of, it informs me when I design things on a small scale, but art has always been a really important piece of my life, and I've always kept up doing it on my own. And it doesn't mean that you have to be skilled at drawing. You know, there's a lot of computer rendering programs that you learn. You know, AutoCAD is a huge one. Mike, what you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I think that landscape architecture is a really broad field, and there's definitely sides of it that, like, you know, cross over into urban planning, that isn't a lot of drawing. It's more kind of writing and then that kind of does overlap into landscape architecture. Even within landscape architecture, there are folks that draw and that don't draw. For me, you know, I was someone who did draw and does draw, and it's important to me. Some people kind of, but it's not a requirement, and not a requirement at all.
There's certain principles with landscape architecture that, you know, right now I'm going through the licensure exams after not taking actually something Mike and I didn't mention was both he and I took sort of circuitous paths. Neither one of our paths was really linear. A lot of people will get out of their undergrad, go right into graduate school, and it's very linear. For me, I went to a graduate school. It was an accelerated program. It wasn't recognized by the American Society of Landscape Architects. So I've had to learn how to get there in a different way. And
I worked in construction. I worked in construction right after undergrad, actually, and then started thinking about like going into architecture. So that was kind of, but I did have I had a very circuitous, abridged period. So I did luckily kind of find landscape architecture, and then I realized that was it.
But there's I know what I was going to say is when you are training as landscape architects, there's principles of design that you need to know and learn, like balance and symmetry and flow. But some of it's logical, you know, like how somebody moves through a space. All that has to do with design. Doesn't necessarily mean you draw a pretty picture, but it means you have to understand human behavior. And like Mike said, it's a really broad field. You could incorporate principles of environmental justice in what you do, or you could do ecological justice. You can do them both. You can do hardscape and do no plants at all, you know? So there's a lot of different avenues you can go and different levels of how artsy you get or how, you know, whatever veil you throw on it.
Kind of off Elena's question, I was wondering like what classes or programs have been the most helpful in developing like the kind of architectural, but also like mostly like the technological, like AutoCAD and GIS software for you guys.
I think you just answered your question for yourself.
Uh,
I took a straight up class in AutoCAD and GIS independently.
Yeah, I think I found that GIS was invented by a landscape architect, and they're Esri, and they're based in Redlands, which is out here. But I would say that it's mostly used by practitioners in planning, rather than in kind of like, there's some in design, but it's more in planning. So there is a lot of, you know, I think that the Adobe suite is always like, in terms of like graphics, is super helpful. Like Illustrator, you know, is kind of super important. AutoCAD is getting less so as people are moving more to Revit, and which is like a program which is like kind of an all-in-one documentation and modeling software. And then
Depends on where you are though, Mike.
yeah.
Like I work for a government agency. They're definitely using AutoCAD. They're not.
I mean,
very little in terms of rendering.
I mean, I use AutoCAD. But I would say more young graduates and stuff, it's getting a little like dinosaur-y. but we're old, so.
Hi, do you have any, like, this is a bit of a general question and then a two-parter, a specific question. Do you have any like tips for people coming out of like an undergrad who want to pursue design and like architecture school, but have not had the background to have that portfolio? Like, do you have any tips for like portfolio building in that way? And then also a bit of a targeted question at you, Mike, of does your firm hire students fresh out of college, or would you require kind of that grad school background?
So I'll start with the portfolio stuff. So I would say that I would encourage to kind of take some classes in like you know, or any community college. You know, you move back home or move somewhere with friends, you can take community college classes really cheaply. You can take
like for rendering.
Figure drawing class, or take a, you know, Illustrator class, or site drawing class. I took watercolor with like, it was like me and a bunch of like blue haired, like, you know, like seniors. And it was so fun, you know, it was like super cool. And then I took, you know, woodworking, and it was interesting. I took woodworking at Laney College, and they couldn't graduate anyone because the program was so good that people would take 2 classes and they would get a job right away. But so I kind of got into this world of like folks like building furniture and stuff. And so I had some of that in my portfolio. And then I would say infographics, you know, develop your own infographics, like tell a story. In my firm is now just me and one other person. So I have not hired any interns or kind of junior people, but it's kind of interesting, maybe. Did I answer all of them?
Yeah, I think it's really good to have something really specific on your resume. I did welding. I learned how to do some welding. I took a summer off and worked on a farm in Italy and learned how to do welding when I was there, and then took classes in welding. And so having that on my resume is definitely something that people like to see, and that has to do with design. I don't I do not have a flashy portfolio. I think that you can take classes, and if you have like, you'll create something called cut sheets, which is basically like a one pager of something that you've done, that's set up. Mike's like, where's my cut sheets?
No, my kid was like
Uh.
annoying me.
So those are good to like create a stack of things for a potential portfolio. Just messing around, things like that is great. In terms of getting your foot in the door, I just wanted to mention, you have to just get to know people. Like I know for this presentation doesn't seem like it, but I'm kind of an introvert. I'm not very good at like putting myself out there and making small talk and meeting people. But attending conferences, attending talks, webinars, getting yourself connected with people, even if you don't know, if you're like, I think I want to do, environmental engineering, then attend a webinar in environmental engineering. There's things going on all the time. Get yourself in there, put your face out there and make some connections, because those people are going to help you get your jobs. Like we will help you get your, all of that's always going to happen. For me, I've gotten multiple jobs by one guy who, for whatever reason, was really impressed by me many years ago. And he just has thrown me jobs over the years, and I've taken a couple of them. And I think that having those connections, I never interned. I was never an intern anywhere. So you don't have to do internships, but you have to be creative. Like my portfolio is a mass of a lot of mishmashy things. So anyway, there's a lot of different avenues.
Sorry, I didn't hear the last things. You didn't ask me a question, did you?
No.
I think we have time for maybe one more question. I do want to acknowledge that it is 8:31.
I had a question if nobody else wants to go. Yeah, it's just that like both of you have like acquired like a lot of technical knowledge in the area, and I guess that the premise of this whole liberal arts is that you learn all the technical skills later. But did you find like like Oberlin valuable as like a liberal arts experience and helped you I guess acquire all this technical knowledge that you needed?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm gonna take that first. So for me, I feel like undergrad is about learning how to learn, learning how to study, learning how to like go for something you don't know and like turn it into something you do know. So that's what it was for me. Learning how to like go from an outsider to an insider, and so that was super valuable to me. And how to not necessarily think critically, but argue critically and argue well. And I will say that Oberlin has a fantastic reputation with graduate schools. So that was like never an issue, so it definitely is a place. So that's super helpful. And it was totally good. I never was like, oh, I didn't learn that there. I feel like I learned what I had to learn there, and then I had plenty of other stuff to learn other places.
I would say a couple of things. One, I took more 100 level classes at Oberlin. It was crazy how many 100 level classes I took as an environmental studies major. And I feel like that I took too many. I wish I had, even if it was not totally related, like I did take the physics of solar energy when I was there. I wish I had taken more classes like that. So if you have any opportunities to go into different things, it'll help you weed out what you want to do and what you don't want to do just a little bit. As Oberlin as a whole, being able to be not just a critical thinker, but a critical writer, like being a really good writer, whether that means from a scientific standpoint or from just knowing how to write a good essay, is so valuable. And that will be valuable for your whole life, in terms of especially in the science fields, like writing technical specifications and being able to be thoughtful about that there's translations. So don't worry, it's useful. That's all I have.
Thank you so much. Y'all have provided some really valuable advice and insight. It is 8:35. So Sarah and Mike, if you want to leave an email in the chat, or if students can reach out to, me or John, and we can send you those questions after this. A recording will be provided in the Careers in the Environment series document. And just a quick plug for the next events in this series. There's a couple more. The next one is happening. Claire, can you remind me of the next event date?
Yeah, the next event date is November 15th, so 2 weeks from now at the same time, at the same Zoom link.
And then also a plug for Wiser, the lovely Oberlin alum connection service. So I'm going to send a link to that now. So join if you haven't. That's another great way to widen your network, as Sarah was mentioning. But other than that, thank you so much, everyone, for coming tonight. Thank you, Mike and Sarah. Have a lovely rest of your evening.
Yeah,
Thanks, guys.
thanks everyone. So feel free to, if anyone wants to contact me, feel free to contact Phoebe or Claire and they can direct you.
And me also. Take care.
Thank you.